The boy shouldn't have been there. That was Willa's first thought when she found him collapsed against the woodpile, half buried in snow, his lips the color of ash. Native children didn't come this far. Into settler territory. Not alone. Not during winter storms. They knew better. Someone had sent him, or someone was chasing him. Either way, the world outside her fence had just gotten more dangerous. His eyes opened for half a second, black and terrified, before closing again. Above his left eyebrow, a deep gash was still bleeding, trickling down his temple into the snow. Fresh. Whatever happened to him happened close, and whoever did it might still be looking. 3 weeks had passed since she'd seen another living soul. The nearest homestead sat 5 miles east, and Harlan Briggs, who owned it, hadn't spoken to her since spring, when she'd refused to sell him her water rights. The isolation suited her fine. After Thomas died, the silence became easier than the questions, easier than the looks. She worked the land alone, slept with the rifle loaded, and asked nothing from anyone. But now there was a child freezing on her property. Willa crouched beside him, her worn gloves dark against the white ground. The boy couldn't have been more than 12. Thin as a scarecrow, dressed in buckskin that offered no protection against the cold that had settled over the valley like a living thing. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each one weaker than the last. She couldn't leave him here. That much was clear. But bringing him inside meant crossing a line she couldn't uncross. Her neighbors already watched her with suspicion. A widow living alone on good land. If they discovered she'd sheltered a native child, they'd have all the excuse they needed to call her sympathizer, traitor, worse. They'd been looking for a reason to drive her out since Thomas's accident. This would be it. The wind picked up, howling through the bare trees. The storm was getting worse. In another hour, the road would be impassable. Anyone tracking the boy would have to wait until morning, assuming they didn't freeze first. Will made her decision. She slid her arms under the boy's shoulders and knees, surprised by how light he was, how little of him there was beneath the soaked buckskin. She carried him toward the house, her boots crunching through the snow, leaving a clear trail anyone could follow. The door protested as she shouldered it open, the hinges stiff with cold. Inside, the fire still burned, low in the stone hearth. She laid the boy on the rug near the flames, then moved quickly to bar the door. Her hands shook as she worked, not from cold, but from the weight of what she'd just done. Through the window, she could see the snow falling harder now, erasing her footprints, hiding the evidence. But not forever. Come morning, someone would notice the smoke from her chimney, the lack of tracks leading away. They'd wonder why she wasn't preparing to leave before the storm trapped her. She knelt beside the boy and began peeling away the wet buckskin. The wound above his eyebrow was deep, made by something sharp. A knife maybe, or a rock. The edges were clean, recent. Someone had tried to hurt him, and they'd meant it. His eyes opened again, wider this time. They found her face, and she watched fear flood into them. "You're safe," she whispered, though she didn't know if he understood English. "I won't hurt you." The boy's lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. She leaned closer, tried to catch the sound. That's when she heard the horses outside. Willa moved fast. She grabbed the boy under his arms and dragged him toward the back room, the one she used for storage. His head lolled against her shoulder, unconscious again. The horses were getting closer, their hooves muffled by snow, but distinct enough. 3 animals, maybe 4, multiple riders. She lowered the boy onto a pile of old blankets behind stacked crates of preserves, then threw a canvas tarp over him. It wouldn't hold up to a real search, but in dim light from the doorway, it might be enough. Her heart hammered as she returned to the main room, smoothing her skirt, forcing her breathing to slow. The knock came hard and impatient. Willow wiped her hands on her apron and opened the door just wide enough to see out. 3 men sat on horseback in her yard, snow collecting on their hat brims. She recognized the one in front immediately. Harlan Briggs, her neighbor, his face red from cold and something else. Anger maybe, or excitement. "Evening, Willa." His voice carried false courtesy. Rough night to be out. Then, why are you? She kept her tone flat, uninviting. Harlan's smile didn't reach. His eyes were tracking something. A thief stole from my property earlier. Today, young one native. You seen anything unusual? Behind him, the other. Two men shifted in their saddles. One of them held a rifle across his lap. The other had a rope coiled at his belt, the kind used for dragging livestock or people. I've been inside all day, Willa said. Storm came up fast. That it did. Heron leaned forward slightly, trying to see past her into the house. Mind if we take a look around? Won't take but a minute. I do mind. Will's hand tightened on the door frame. I don't take kindly to men riding up demanding entry to my home. The temperature in the yard seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Harlan's false friendliness evaporated. That boy is dangerous, Willa. He attacked one of my ranch hands, cut him with a blade. We got a right to retrieve what's ours and see justice done. Something about the way he said it made her stomach turn. The wound on the boy's shoulder was defensive, made by someone protecting himself. And Harlan didn't care about justice. He cared about control, about showing everyone in the valley that crossing him had consequences. There's no one here but me, she said firmly. And I'd appreciate you leaving my property. Harlan studied her for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing tobacco. Finally, he straightened in his saddle. If you're hiding something, Willa, it'll come out. Always does. And when it does, people will remember you chose wrong. He pulled his horse around, and the others followed. But they didn't ride away. Fussed. They moved slowly, deliberately, their eyes scanning the snow around her house, looking for tracks, for signs, for any excuse to come back. Willa watched until they disappeared into the swirling white, then closed the door and leaned against it. Her legs felt weak. She just made an enemy of the most powerful man in the valley, and he knew. She was lying. She returned to the back room and pulled the tarp away. The boy's eyes were open watching her. This time, the fear in them was mixed with something else. Recognition, like he understood exactly what she'd just risked for him. What's your name? She asked quietly. His lips moved, barely a whisper. Chayton. She nodded, filing the name away. You need to tell me what happened. Who hurt you? But before he could answer, she heard it. The sound that made her blood go cold. More horses, coming from a different direction. Will pressed her back against the wall, listening. These riders moved. Differently, quieter. No heavy hooves crashing through snowdrifts. No shoutif. Commands. They approached like water, moving around stones. Present but nearly invisible. Through the window she caught glimpses for figures on horseback. Dark shapes against white. They wore no heavy coats like Harlan's men. Their movements were efficient, purposeful. Native riders. They had to be. Chayton tried to sit up, pain flashing across his face. No, he whispered urgently. Don't let them see me. Your people? Will ask confused. Not mine. His voice was strained, each word clearly costing him from the north. Camp. They work with the settlers now. They are the ones who he touched his forehead near the wound, wincing. The pieces started connecting in Willa's mind. Harlan had called Chayton a thief, but the boy hadn't stolen from him. He'd witnessed something or refused. Something, and that refusal had marked him for death. The riders outside weren't coming to rescue him. They were coming to finish what they'd started. She moved to the window and peered out carefully. The lead rider had dismounted and was examining the ground near her woodpile. He crouched low, studying something she couldn't see from this angle. Then he looked up directly at her window. For a moment, their eyes met. His face was weathered, older, with deep lines carved around his mouth. He said something over his shoulder to the others, and two of them dismounted as well. They were going to search the property. Will's mind raced. The boy couldn't walk, couldn't run, couldn't defend himself, and she couldn't fight off four armed riders. She had her rifle, but firing it would bring Harlan and his men racing back. She'd be caught between two groups, both wanting the same thing. She returned to the back room. Can you ride? Chayton shook his head. Can barely stand. Then we hide you better. She looked around desperately. The storage room had no other exits, no clever hiding places, just crates, barrels, and old furniture Thomas had planned to repair before he died. The knock on the door came soft this time, almost polite. Willow walked back to the main room, forcing her steps to remain steady. She opened the door a crack. The older rider stood on her porch alone, his hands visible and empty. He spoke in accented English, careful and measured. "Good evening. We are searching for someone, a young one from our camp. He is injured and needs help." It sounded almost genuine, almost concerned. But Willa had spent 2 years learning to read lies in men's faces. This one was smooth, practiced, dangerous in a different way than Heron, but no less threatening. "I haven't seen anyone," she said. The rider nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. "We tracked him to this area. His footprints led near your home before the snow covered them. The storm has been heavy. Tracks disappear quickly." "Yes." He smiled, but it was thin and cold. "Yet your fire burns warm. A boy, freezing in the cold, would be drawn to such warmth, like a moth drawn to flame." The comparison made her skin crawl. He knew. Maybe he couldn't prove it, but he knew. "I'm alone here," Willa said, "and it's late. I'd appreciate you continuing your search elsewhere." The rider's smile faded. He studied her face for a long moment, then glanced past her shoulder into the house. She resisted the urge to close the door, further to block his view. "That would be an admission. If you find him," the man said quietly, "you should know what he is. He broke sacred laws, betrayed his own people. The punishment for such betrayal is not quick." He let those words hang in the cold air between them. Then he turned and walked back to his horse. The 4 riders mounted and moved away, but slowly circling the perimeter of her property, their eyes scanning every shadow. Willa closed the door and locked it. She leaned her forehead against the wood, trying to steady her breathing. Twice now she'd lied to dangerous men. Twice she'd chosen the boy over her own safety. She returned to the storage room. Chayton was sitting up now, his face pale but alert. "What did you do?" she asked. "What's sacred? Law did you break?" He looked at her for a long moment, weighing his words. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I refused to help them kill someone." Outside, the wind howled louder, and somewhere in the darkness, she heard the sound of men shouting. They'd found something. Willa grabbed her rifle and moved to the window. In the distance, she could see torches, multiple flames cutting through the snowfall, moving in formation. The riders had regrouped, both groups from what she could tell. Harlan's men and the native trackers united by a common purpose: finding the boy. "They've joined together," she said, more to herself than to Chayton. He tried to stand but immediately collapsed back against the wall. "They want the same thing: to silence me before I can reach my people." "Why?" Will kept her eyes on the approaching lights. "What did you see?" Chayton's breathing was labored. "Heron promised weapons to the northern camp in exchange for help taking land. Your land. All the homesteads along the river. They plan to make it look like raids. Burn the houses. Blame the southern tribes." He paused, pain etched across his face. "They wanted me to help, because I know the territory. When I refused, they tried to kill me." The truth settled over Willa like frost. Her land wasn't valuable because of the soil or the water. It was strategic. Control the river, control the valley. And Harlan had found people willing to help him take it by force, dressed up as tribal warfare. "How many people have they killed already?" she asked. 3 families last month. Everyone thought it was tribal conflict. His voice dropped to a whisper. It wasn't. The torches were getting closer. She could hear voices now, shouting back and forth. They'd found the trail she'd made, dragging the boy inside. The snow had covered some of it, but not all. Not enough. Will made a decision. She couldn't fight them off, but she could. By time, she went to the kitchen and grabbed the lamp oil. Working quickly, she poured it along the inside of the door frame and across the threshold. Not enough to start a real fire, but enough to create smoke. Confusion. Then she moved to the back room. "Can you walk if I help you?" she asked Chayton. Maybe for a short distance. That'll have to be enough. She pulled him to his feet, steadying him as he swayed. There's a root cellar outside, dug into the hillside behind the house. It's hidden by brush. If we can get you there before they reach the door, you might have a chance. Through the window, she could see the torches were less than 100 yards away. The men on horseback moved deliberately now, confident, closing in, like wolves on wounded prey. She half carried Chayton to the back door, the one facing away from the approaching riders. The cold hit them immediately, brutal and sharp. Snow stung her face as she guided him across the yard, his weight heavy against her shoulder. Each step felt impossibly slow, each second stretched like hours. The root cellar entrance was barely visible beneath accumulated snow. She kicked the covering away and pulled the wooden door open. The smell of earth and cold storage vegetables rose up to meet them. Get down there, she urged. Stay quiet now. Matter what you hear. Chayton gripped her arm, his fingers surprisingly strong. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Your people killed mine. Mine killed yours. Willa looked at him. This child who'd stumbled into her life and brought nothing but danger. Because someone has. To choose different, she said simply. She helped him down into the darkness, then closed the door and kicked snow back over it. By the time she turned around, the riders were in her yard. 8 men, torches held high, rifles drawn. Harlan dismounted first, his face triumphant. We know he's here. Willa found his blood trail leading right to your back door. He walked toward her, slowly, savoring the moment. You're going to step aside, and we're going to search this property, and when we find him, you're going to answer for harboring a criminal. Behind him, the native riders spread out, cutting off any escape route. One of them, the older man who'd spoken to her earlier, watched with dark, unreadable eyes. Willa raised her rifle, not pointing it at anyone specifically, but making her intentions clear. You'll have to go through me. First, Harlan actually laughed. One woman with one rifle against 8 armed men. Those are bad odds, Willa. Maybe. She steadied her aim. But I guarantee I take at least one of you with me, maybe 2. Who want to be first? The men shifted uneasily. No one moved forward. Then something changed. The older native rider held up his hand, signaling the others to wait. He tilted his head, listening. After a moment, Willa heard it too. More horses, many more coming from the direction of the Southern Territories. And this time, they weren't being quiet about it. The riders emerged from the darkness like shadows taking form. 20, maybe 30 of them moving in tight formation. They wore traditional garments, carried weapons, and rode with the confidence of warriors on their own territory. At their head rode a man whose presence commanded immediate attention. Older, weathered, with gray streaking through long hair. His gaze swept across Willa's yard, taking in everything at once. The northern riders immediately tensed, hands moving toward weapons. But Harlan held up a hand, stopping his men from drawing. Even he recognized when the odds had shifted beyond his control. The lead southern rider stopped his horse 10 feet from where Willa stood. He looked at her, then at the armed men surrounding her property, then back to her. When he spoke, his English was clear and formal. We seek one of our own, a boy. He was taken from us and hunted across your lands. Harlan stepped forward, attempting to reclaim authority. That boy is a thief and a criminal. The rider's gaze shifted to Heron, and whatever he saw in those eyes made the settler's words die in his throat. Your words are known to us, the rider said quietly. As are your plans. The boy you hunt carried word of your betrayal. That is why you want him silenced. He looked back at Willa. Is he here? Willa made a choice. She'd protected Chayton this far. She could finish it. He's safe, she said, and I won't let anyone harm him. The rider studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. You have honor. Rare in these times. He dismounted and approached slowly, hands visible and empty. I'm Takakota. The boy is my sister's son. She has grieved for 3 days, believing him dead. Something in his voice, the weight of genuine concern, made Willa lower her rifle slightly. He's hurt, needs medicine, and Rest. Then we will take him home. Dakota glanced at the root cellar, somehow, knowing exactly where the boy was hidden. But first, these men and I have business to discuss. What happened next occurred with brutal efficiency. The Southern riders moved as one, surrounding Heron and his group. No shots were fired. No one was killed. But the message was unmistakably clear. Harlan and his conspirators were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and completely at Takakota's mercy. You will leave these lands, Takakota said to Harlan. Take your weapons, your promises, and your greed elsewhere. If you return, if you continue your schemes, we will not be so forgiving. The older northern rider who'd betrayed. His people tried to speak, but Dakota silenced him with a single look. As for you and your men, you have chosen collaboration over honor. Your own people will judge you for that. Within minutes, Harlan and the others were mounted and riding away, surrounded by Southern warriors who escorted them to the edge of the valley. The only ones who remained were Takakota and two others. Willa opened the root cellar. Chayton climbed out slowly, his face pale but alive with relief. When he saw his uncle, something broke in the boy's composure. He stumbled forward and Takakota caught him, supporting his weight. You did well, Takakota said quietly to his nephew. Your warning reached us in time. Chayton looked back at Willa. She saved my life. Multiple times. They would have killed me. Takakota approached Willa and for a moment she tensed, unsure what to expect, but he simply placed his hand over his heart in a gesture of respect. You risked everything for a stranger, for a child not of your people. Such courage will be remembered. He reached into his clothing and pulled out a small object, pressing it into her palm. It was a carved stone, smooth and dark, marked with symbols she didn't recognize. If you're ever in need, show this. It will be honored. I don't need payment, Willis said, trying to hand it back. It is not payment. It is a promise. Takakota mounted his horse and helped Chayton up behind him. The boy was weak, leaning heavily against his uncle, but his eyes remained fixed on Willa. I won't forget, Chayton called out as they began to move away. I promise I won't forget. Will watched them disappear into the darkness, the carved stone heavy in her hand. The yard was empty now, silent except for the wind and snow. She looked at her house, at the blood trail already being covered by fresh snowfall, at the disturbed earth where desperate men had searched for their prey. She'd made enemies tonight, powerful ones. Harlan wouldn't forgive this humiliation. He'd wait, plan, and eventually he'd come for her land anyway. But for now, she was alive. And somewhere out there, a boy was alive, too, because she'd chosen to act rather than hide. That had to be enough. Willow went inside, barred the door, and fed the fire. Outside, the storm continued its assault. But inside, for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel quite so alone. She placed the carved stone on the mantel next to the photograph of Thomas. Then she sat down to wait for whatever came next. 13 years had changed everything and nothing at all. Will stood in her doorway, watching smoke rise from the Turner place 2 miles east. That made 3 farms burned in the past month. The Bishops had fled last week after finding their livestock slaughtered. The Hendersons left without even packing, just rode out in the night with whatever they could carry. She was the last one, left on this stretch of river. The carved stone Takakota had given her sat in her pocket, worn smooth from years of nervous handling. She'd pulled it out countless times, wondering if the promise it represented still held weight. After so many years, wondering if the boy she'd saved even remembered her. Probably not. He'd been a child, terrified and hurt. People forget, especially when their lives move on. Her hands weren't as steady as they used to be. Her hair had gone mostly gray. The rifle felt heavier each time she lifted it, but the land was still hers. And she'd be damned if she'd run from it now. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. As he got closer, she recognized him. Curtis, one of Harlan's men. He pulled his horse up short at her fence line. Mrs. Glenn, he called out, not bothering to dismount. Mr. Briggs sent me with a message. He prepared to offer you $2,000 for this property cash. You got until sunset tomorrow to accept. And if I don't, Curtis shifted in his saddle. Uncomfortable. Then he can't guarantee your safety. There have been a lot of accidents lately. Fires. It'd be a shame if something happened to you. It wasn't even subtle anymore. Harlan had grown. Bold over the years, accumulated wealth and influence. He'd systematically driven out every homesteader between here and the mountain pass. Men who refused to sell had their crops poisoned, their wells contaminated, their families threatened. And now there was only Willa. You tell Heron the answer is the same as it's always been. She said, this land isn't for sale. Curtis nodded like he'd expected nothing else. He figured you'd say that. Wanted me to remind you that you're alone out here. No neighbors to help, no family. Just you and whatever stubborn pride keeps you from seeing sense. He rode off, without waiting for a response. Willow watched him disappear, then looked at the smoke still rising from the Turner place. She'd known Frank Turner for 15 years. Good man, hard worker. He'd fought Heron for months before finally giving in, and Heron had burned his home anyway as a message to anyone else who thought about resisting. She went back inside and loaded her rifle, then loaded her revolver, then checked the ammunition stores. She had enough to hold off maybe 5 or 6 men if she was lucky. But Harlan wouldn't send 5 or 6. He'd learned from their last encounter he'd send 20, maybe more. The sun moved across the sky, indifferent to her situation. By late afternoon, she saw them coming. A group of riders, at least 15, moving in formation toward her property. Harlan led them, sitting tall in his saddle, confident. They stopped at her fence line. Harlan dismounted and walked forward alone, his hands visible, but his intent clear in every step. Last chance, Willa, he called out. Take the money and go. Live somewhere. Comfortable, somewhere safe. She stood on her porch, rifle in hand. You're not welcome here. I've been patient, more patient than you deserve, but my patience has limits. He gestured to the men behind him. You see all these witnesses? They're going to swear you fired first, that we came here to negotiate peacefully, and you responded with violence. Self-defense. No court will question it. He was right. He'd built enough influence, paid off enough. Officials. The law wouldn't protect her. Nothing would. You do what you have to do, Willis said, but you'll have to kill me to take this land. And that blood will be on your hands, witnesses or not. Harlan's face hardened. He turned and nodded to his men. They began to dismount, spreading out, preparing to advance. Some carried torches. They weren't planning to arrest her or negotiate further. They were going to burn her out, just like they burned out everyone else. Will raised her rifle, sighting down the barrel. Her hands shook, but her resolve didn't. If this was where her story ended, she'd end it on her own terms. The first man stepped forward with a torch, and something made him stop. He turned, looking back toward the valley. The others noticed it too, their attention shifting from Willa to something in the distance. She heard it, then faint at first, but growing steadily louder. The sound of many horses moving fast, more riders approaching, and from the reaction of Harlan's men, these weren't reinforcements. From the direction of the Southern Territories, a group of riders crested the hill, 30 or more, moving in perfect formation. They wore traditional garments, carried weapons, and rode with unmistakable purpose. At their head, sitting tall and commanding on a painted horse, was a man Willa didn't recognize at first, older than the boy she remembered, stronger, bearing the marks of leadership and responsibility. But when his eyes found hers across the distance, she knew him immediately. The scar above his left eyebrow, the determined set of his jaw, the way he looked at her with recognition that transcended years. Chayton had come home, and he'd brought his people with him. Chayton dismounted with fluid grace, his eyes never leaving Harlan. He walked forward until he stood between Willis, porch, and a line of settlers. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of authority earned through years of leadership. You are on protected land. Leave now, and no blood will be spilled today. Harlan's face flushed red, but he maintained his composure. This is settler territory. You have no authority here. I have the authority of 30 warriors who remember what you did 13 years ago. What you tried to do. Chayton's hand rested casually near the knife at his belt. We remember the families you murdered, the blame you try to place on our people. Did you think we would forget? Harlan's men shifted nervously. Some of them had been there that winter night. They remembered being surrounded, outmaneuvered, sent away in disgrace. The balance of power was clear then. It was even clearer now. That was settled years ago, Harlan said, but his confidence was cracking. Ancient history. History repeats itself when men like you refuse to learn. Chayton took another step forward. You spent 13 years stealing land, through fear and fire, forcing families from their homes. And now you come for the one person who showed true courage when it mattered most. He turned slightly, addressing Harlan's men directly. This woman saved my life when I was a boy, risked everything to protect a stranger. While you follow a man who burns homes and threatens widows, she chose honor. Which of you can say the same? Several of Harlan's men looked at the ground. One of them, the one holding a torch, let it fall and stepped back from the group. You have no proof of anything, Harlan snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. These are legal transactions, property rights. Rights earned through terror are not rights at all. Chayton's voice remained calm, measured. Leave this land. Abandon your claim. Return what you've stolen to the families you drove out. Or what? Harlan's hand moved toward his gun. 30 warriors raised their weapons in perfect unison. The sound of arrows being knocked, rifles being cocked, created a deadly symphony that needed no translation. Or we defend what should have been defended 13 years ago, Chayton said quietly. Your choice is simple. Ride away now, or we carry you away. Either way, you leave. Harlan looked around at his men. Most of them had already backed away, unwilling to die for land that wasn't theirs in a fight they couldn't win. Only 3 remained close to him, and even they looked uncertain. You're making a mistake, Harlan said, but he was already retreating toward his horse. The law has failed. These people, we will not. Chayton stood his ground until Harlan was mounted. If you return, if you threaten anyone in this valley again, there will be no more warnings, no more chances. Do you understand? Harlan didn't answer. He spurred his horse and rode hard toward the east, his remaining men scrambling to follow. Within minutes, they were gone, leaving only dust and abandoned torches behind. The tension broke like a snapped rope. Chayton's warriors relaxed slightly, but remained vigilant, watching the horizon for any sign of return. Chayton turned and walked to where Willis stood on her porch. She'd lowered her rifle, but her hands still trembled, not from fear now, but from the overwhelming relief of surviving what should have killed her. You came, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I promised I wouldn't forget. Chayton stood at the bottom of her porch steps, looking up at her with eyes that held both the boy she'd saved and the man he'd become. Every year since that night, we've watched this valley. Watched you. Waited to see if you would need us. You've been watching me for 13 years, protecting you. He pulled something from his clothing. It was identical to the stone Takakota had given her. My uncle gave you a promise. Our people honor such promises. When we heard Harlan was moving against you, I gathered our warriors and came as fast as we could. We descended the steps slowly, standing before him. He'd grown tall, strong, carried himself with the confidence of a respected leader. But in his eyes, she still saw traces of the frightened boy who'd been bleeding in her woodpile. You didn't have to do this, she said. Yes, I did. Chayton placed his hand over his heart in the same gesture Takakota had used years ago. You showed me that courage means choosing right over easy. That honor transcends the boundaries we draw between peoples. I've tried to lead my people with that same courage. Behind him, his warriors were already spreading out, examining the property, checking for threats. Several of them began clearing away the abandoned torches, making sure no fires could start accidentally. What happens now? Will asked. Now we make sure Harlan keeps his distance. Some of my men will remain nearby watching. Others will help the families he drove out return to their lands if they wish. Chayton looked at her farmhouse at the land she'd refused to abandon. And you continue living the life you fought to protect. Willa felt something loosen in her chest, a tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. Thank you for coming, for remembering. Thank you for giving me a life worth remembering. Chayton mounted his horse, then paused. My people are preparing for a gathering next month, a celebration of harvest and unity. You be welcome there. Honored, actually. I'd like that, Willis said, surprising herself. Chayton smiled, and for just a moment, she saw the boy again. Then he turned his horse and rejoined his warriors. Together, they moved across her property and into the hills beyond. Silent guardians returning to watch over the valley they claimed as their responsibility. Willis stood alone in her yard once more. But the solitude felt different now. Not isolation, but peace. The smoke from the Turner place had stopped rising. In the distance, she could see other families returning to their abandoned homes, emerging cautiously from hiding, reclaiming what fear had stolen. The valley was healing, and she was part of that healing, a thread connecting two peoples who'd learned that survival meant more than territory. It meant choosing each other when it mattered most. The harvest celebration took place on neutral ground, in a meadow between the settler homesteads and the southern territories. Willa arrived early, carrying bread. She'd baked that morning in vegetables from her garden. She wore her best dress, the blue one she'd kept wrapped in paper since Thomas died. Family she hadn't seen in months had returned. The Bishops were rebuilding their barn. The Hendersons had planted winter crops. The Turners stood beside their new cabin, built with help from both settlers and natives working side by side. The smoke that rose now came from cooking fires, not destruction. Chayton found her as the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. He brought his family. His wife, a quiet woman named Ayanna, held their infant daughter. Two younger warriors stood nearby, respectful but watchful. She has your eyes, Willis said, looking at the baby and her mother's patience. Thankfully, Chayton smiled. I wanted you to meet them. Wanted them to know the woman who changed everything. They walked together to the edge of the gathering where the noise faded and they could speak privately. Below them, the valley stretched out in the fading light. Smoke rose from a dozen chimneys. Fields showed the work of recent planting. The river flowed peacefully through land that had seen too much conflict. Harlan left the territory, Chayton said, sold what remained of his holdings to a family from the east. Good people from what I hear. They understand that. This valley belongs to everyone who respects it. In the northern camp, the ones who worked with him faced judgment from their own people. Some were exiled. Others work now to repair the damage they caused. Chayton watched his daughter grab at Ayanna's necklace. Violence answers nothing, but accountability matters. Willa thought about that night 13 years ago when she'd made a choice that seemed small in the moment, but had rippled through time. One frightened boy, one act of courage, and from an transformation neither of them could have predicted. I've been thinking about what you said. She told him about courage being the choice to do right over easy. I spent 2 years alone on that farm because I thought isolation was safety. But you taught me something different. I taught you. Chayton looked surprised. You came back. You didn't have to. You'd built a life, started a family, became a leader. But you honored a promise made by a child to a stranger. That's courage. She pulled the carved stone from her pocket. This wasn't just protection. It was proof that connections matter more than boundaries. Music started behind them. Drums and fiddles playing together, creating something neither culture could produce alone. Children ran between groups, playing without concern for which side their parents stood on. Elders shared food and stories. The gathering wasn't perfect. There was still weariness, still old wounds, but it was a beginning. My uncle will be proud, Chayton said quietly. He always believed peace was possible. He just didn't live long enough to see it. He saw enough. Will looked at the celebration, at the community building itself, one shared meal at a time. He saw you grow into the man who made this happen. Ayana approached, offering the baby to Willa. She took the child carefully, feeling the weight of new life, new possibility. The infant looked up at her with dark, curious eyes. "What's her name?" Willa asked. "Kimala," Chayton said. "It means butterfly, a creature that transforms, that carries beauty between worlds." The baby grabbed Willa's finger with surprising strength. In that grip, she felt the future. Not perfect, not without struggle, but possible. A future where the choice she made 13 years ago continued bearing fruit. Where courage begot courage, where one person's decision to see humanity instead of sides could change the trajectory of generations. As darkness fell, lanterns were lit throughout the meadow. The celebration continued, voices rising in laughter and song. Willa handed Kimmy Mela back to her mother and rejoined the gathering. For the first time since Thomas died, she didn't return alone to an empty house. Friends walked with her part of the way. Warriors posted as distant guardians raised hands in greeting as she passed. Her farm waited in the darkness, solid and enduring. But it wasn't a fortress anymore. It was home, and home, she'd learned, meant more than walls and land. It meant belonging to something larger than yourself. It meant being part of a community that chose to build rather than destroy. Willa Glenn went asleep that night, with doors unlocked and heart unguarded. The carved stones sat on her mantle, no longer a lifeline, but a reminder. Some debts transcend payment. Some promises outlive those who make them. And some acts of courage echo forward through time, changing not just individual lives, but the shape of the world itself. The valley was at peace, and she had helped make it so. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now for another powerful tale from the frontier where honor and destiny collide in unexpected ways. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us bring you more stories like these. Your support means everything.